You're listening to Real with Coach Herb and B, a podcast that brings you community and culture with your host, Coach Herb and B.
Yeah, right. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Coach Herb and my girl B, and we are joined by no relation, Miss Courtney Williams, even though she has part of my last name. I don't think we're related. I mean, we could be. I mean, all Africans are from somewhere, right? We're all from somewhere. So
right
down the line, she could be part of my Williams side. I don't know. And she's joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa.
That's right.
So welcome.
Welcome, Court. Take your mute off.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. I know
that
we're on a different time zone, so you know you're wide awake and we're getting wide awake.
Yeah, the sun's gonna be setting in like the next hour.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm waiting for my coffee to steep right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Totally different time of day.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, but yeah. But the
I'm
world is flat,
for you,
by the way, so I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Say it again.
They keep saying the world is flat, and I'm confused because if the sun is about to set where you are,
let me tell you something. Flat? Are you going to be one of those flat Earth conspiracy theory people? Because I am not ready for that today. I am not.
Okay, so then let's just get real then. Why don't you just tell us about yourself really quickly, and just break it down for us.
Yeah, so my name is Courtney. I live here in Joburg, where I've been for the last 2.5 years. I moved to Joburg for no professional reasons. Everyone always asks me. I just really love Joburg. I had been coming to South Africa for a few years, and brought 2 sets of high school students to Joburg and Cape Town, and I just wanted something different. So I moved, leaving DC, where I went to Howard. I'm originally from Texas. I work in strategy. I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I also am a part-time chef. I cook from the abundance of my heart, not as professionally as I used to, but food is really important to me. Food security is really important to me. A lot of my work centers on food security, both here and in Joburg, as well as when I lived in DC.
Okay. Now, when you say food security, I know here I go again. What does that mean? Does that mean
so there are some there are some professional definitions from the World Food Program, but basically food security means access, consistent access to food that is healthy and good for you. So it's the ability to afford food, as well as the ability to get to food, fresh produce. So that looks very different in DC and in Joburg, and it looks very different in urban Joburg than it does in like rural South Africa. So food is really accessible in the fact that it grows from the ground, and most people have access to grow food in rural areas in South Africa. And similar to Joburg, and DC and Joburg are similar in the fact that lots of people need to have enough money to be able to access healthy food and food on a regular basis, to be able to pay to go to buy food at the grocery store, because they don't have land to just grow it in the backyard. But that food security has challenges in South Africa because of global warming. It's hot in the same ways that California is on fire right now. Different places on the continent are also on fire, and Southern Africa experiences a lot of climate change. So people might have land behind their house to grow food, but they don't have access to water. So food security means a lot of different things, and it really just depends on the area in which you're working on it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah, because it's very different here. Like in DC, Court, you already know, like it's hard for people to get food in Southeast, right? Because
Right.
Southeast don't have that many grocery stores, right? They got like more bodega
Liquor
type
stores.
places than than anything.
They got a lot of liquor stores.
They got a lot of liquor stores, but you ain't getting fresh food at the liquor store, right? So you're getting a lot of processed food,
right?
And the Arizona iced tea is cheaper than the bottle of water,
and Rock Creek sodas and things like that, right? So like
that, how come that price never goes up? Arizona iced tea, it never goes up.
I don't really know. I'm not
it's
sure.
It's always funny when you go in the carry out and they want to charge you $1 something for an Arizona iced tea. Friend, it says $1 on the can.
It says it on the
and
can.
not even $1. It says 99 cents on the
it
can.
Says 99 cents on the can.
You can't hide it.
You can't have the tax. That's it. That's
all right. Let me see. I'm doing it again. I gotta stop. So let's get real, B.
All right, Court. So check this out. So I know you mentioned that you're from Texas, but what made you leave Texas? What made you choose to come to the East Coast and come to Howard?
Well, I always knew I was going to leave Texas. And I actually just wrote about this. I wrote a piece about the power of imagination, but I'm originally from East Texas. So I'm from like little farmland, Texas. I had a goat as a child and chickens. And my great grandmother started applying to get college information for me when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And so my whole life going to university was something that was absolutely going to happen for me. My great grandmother just knew that, I was the first of my generation, and she just knew that I would go to university, that this would be the generation that would go, and not just to university, but that I would get on a plane and go to some place. And so I had Harvard information coming in from like elementary school. Even when I graduated high school, even when I graduated high school 15 years later in a different city, there's still mail that was coming to Marshall, Texas for me. And so, I always knew I would go to university, and I always knew I would have to leave home to go to university. And I have to be honest, I went to Howard because the people were beautiful. I went to campus and I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these Black people. They're so pretty. And the rest is history. I could have made, some more thoughtful decisions, like the pollution in DC is horrible. I almost died my first year. I had so many asthma attacks. So it could have been a lot more thoughtful. But it was the best decision that I could have ever made. Like everyone who went to Howard and survived, it was really the very best decision I've ever made in my life. Yeah.
I meet a lot of people that went to Howard that say the same. Like, it's like, even though the name Howard, like people are like, oh yeah, but it's like going to Harvard for Black people.
For Black people,
it's like it's one of the best schools.
Yeah, because I felt like when I was watching people come out of Howard, or more so go into, I was like, man, they're gonna be elite. It's gonna be something else when I see them come out and graduate and prosper at everything that Howard installs into you, right? They instill so much.
So your journey must be pretty cool, because you've come from Texas and then you went to Washington DC and now you're in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's like almost like a humongous triangle that happened in your life right now. So, I don't know whether it's Johannesburg is like the place that you're going to live for the rest of your life, but it seems like it's something that you feel very grounded about. So I'm happy for you, and hopefully continued success in what your endeavors are. And reeling back on that, what are your main things that you are doing there?
Oh yeah, that's a really big question. So I mentioned that I work in equity strategy. So I take a lot of clients in the States, actually, a lot of tech firms, some community-based organizations. A lot of my work is how can organizations be more thoughtful about how to mitigate the barriers that prevent traditionally disadvantaged groups from entering their workforce, for being eligible for their grants, whatever those things might be. And then a lot of my work in South Africa focuses on creating more opportunities for traditionally marginalized groups to be the experts in their experiences. So I put on a writing conference a couple of weeks ago, and we centered the power of imagination as a mode of knowing, in the same way that my grandmother knew that I would go to college, knew that I would attend this university, and her means of knowing willed that into existence for me. We equipped 6 different delegates from all of them from South Africa, not all of them South African, that wrote about different ways to mitigate for the barriers that people experience in their day-to-day, in the mundane. I mean, the coronavirus pandemic has been such a spectacular occurrence, and people have experienced extreme like food insecurity, water insecurity, and all of these types of things. But in the day-to-day, people experience a lot of challenges just to get from their home to where they work. So what does it mean to create better systems for them? And I do a lot of, I've started doing a lot of research on violence against queer bodies, what that means and what that means in academia. So in South Africa and, around the world, it's not as popular in the States, but there's a word femicide, which is the genocide of women, the murder of women, particularly at the hands of men. But a lot of queer people are murdered by the same type of patriarchy, and not just by men, but also in queer communities. And so I do a lot of research around that. That's become very big for me in this last year since I moved to Joburg in particular. I think I lived in a bubble when I lived in DC. And so my experiences as a queer person have expanded a lot in Joburg. And then I do anything that's food related. I cook food. I cook a lot of food for my community. That's really important to me. I support organizations that provide food, especially for houseless folks and queer folks. I support both with research and comm stuff, like work professionally, but also financially support organizations that provide subsidized food for communities that wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to it on a regular basis. Like, being able to eat is so important. And there's so many people that don't have access to food. So a lot of my work is about, do people have food? And do people enjoy the food that they eat? Food is really, really important to me. So, yeah.
Yep.
And you have
gotta taste good going down.
Of course, right? Right. You have so when I experienced you here with me on a daily basis, you would cook for us all the time, and you would cook professionally as well. And so can you talk about a little bit of your time here in the DC area before you professionally moved over to Joburg? Because you were doing food distribution when it comes to cooking single meals and meal prep, and also doing what we did at the Y with our kitchen, and teaching as well. So food education is, I know, big to you, but talk about what you did a little bit here and compare it to what you're doing over in Joburg, because I know it's different. It's not what you were doing here, basically.
Yeah, it's been a major transition. So I think in DC, I had a lot of room to do small projects. So I did a lot of different projects. I like doing projects. It's clearly where my personality is, and I like to do a lot of them at once. So in DC, as B was saying, I did a lot of paraprofessional cooking. I had private clients that I prepared food for on a daily basis, as well as doing meal preps. I taught a lot of younger elementary school students either private cooking lessons, as well as through the YMCA, as well as through some elementary schools I taught cooking lessons to groups of kids. I really think it's so cool when kids get freaked out about putting their hands in food. And I'm like, you be playing in the dirt, but you don't want to put your hands in this food.
Right.
It's so funny. They're so adorable.
Sometimes they
and I
eat
think
it.
it's,
Right.
yes, oh, right. I think it's so, I just really find that to be particularly exciting. And I also taught a Food Love Life course for adolescent mothers in Southeast, worked in partnership with a transitional living program that takes young women that have children in either during their pregnancy or while the child is under the age of 3. And so I taught in partnership with someone that I met at the Y. I taught a Food Love Life course, and really that was me teaching is really not how I should describe it. I mean, I held the space. I brought the food for us to cook together, but it was more like, like sister girl get-togethers, right? Like, and it was a really important thing for me because, as I mentioned, food has always been really, really important to me and has had such an important impact on my life. My great-grandmother cooked. I prepared most of the meals in my household for much of my teenage life. But my mom was a single parent, and my mom had been an adolescent parent with me. And so this journey of engaging in this food program with adolescent mothers that were teenagers, that had kids, was a major healing factor for me. So yeah, that was a lot of the food work I did. I also, worked for these programs that taught high school students social entrepreneurship, and that's how I brought students to Joburg and a few other places as well. Here in Joburg, it's been quite different. So when I moved, I thought that I would get into a lot of food work. I tried to navigate a lot of food spaces, and it was really difficult. I managed a restaurant for a few months last year. I came in to do like a consultation. Well, no, I first came in to do some consultation around plant-based food. So I'm plant-based. That's a fact that I didn't bring up. So I do a lot of work around like plant-based eating, plant-based food, just like eat the rainbow kind of lifestyle. So I did a consultation to bring vegan food into the restaurant that turned into me managing front of the house. And I mean, restaurant spaces are just really hyper masculine, and it was really a lot. And I was always finding myself in fights with the owners and with the head chef, and I just wasn't for it. And a lot of the fights came back to, like on principle, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm not a man. And I was tired of it. And so I left the restaurant space and I looked for other opportunities. But the opportunities that I was really familiar with are very white. In a South African experience. So teaching like food classes, like teaching classes that people are going to pay, the equivalent of $35 US to come out, and learn about cooking this 3-course meal is not something that you stereotypically find in like Black, even bourgeois neighborhoods. So that meant if I was going to do those opportunities, that they were going to primarily be with white people. And I live in a country that's 90% Black, and I just wasn't, I wasn't feeling it. So a lot of my food stuff has changed a lot. And so most of the food stuff I do now, I have to create those spaces, which makes it even more exciting, but, of course brings a challenge. And then obviously during Corona, that becomes a little bit more unrealistic.
A little tasking, right?
Just, just a little small barrier, just smidge of a problem.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear that because it's so different. Like,
it is
so,
different.
not to go on this little thing, but like, I heard you mention the fact that, you're in a country full of 90%, of course, Black people or Africans, right? You are in Johannesburg where it's predominantly white in a sense. How does that, and it's not
No, it's not predominantly
so
white.
Joburg is now, and that was my question, is more so how has it changed from before when the mindset was that it was predominantly white. And now how has it changed?
So Joburg is a very Black city, and Joburg has pretty historically been a Black city because it's a migrant city. So even the South Africans that live in Joburg, unless they are what is categorized as like born free, so under 26, their history is of migrating to Joburg because people came here to work in the mines. And it's urban and it's grown in this way that's like very similar to DC, that people needed jobs. So they just migrated in the masses. Cape Town, however, is a very white city, and it's very viscerally white. It feels like racism to me, right? That's a very personal experience. But structurally, spatially, the spatial layout, because of apartheid, most Black people can't afford to live in Cape Town. Whereas Joburg is a little bit different. So the city center is quite Black and it's quite immigrant. And very similar to some of the urban places in the States, white people fled from the cities, so most of the businesses have been moved to this area that's called Sandton, which is still technically Joburg. I mean, if you think about like the Dallas Metroplex and that way that there are all of these cities that compile into Dallas, that's how Joburg is. So the city is very Black, and I live in the city, which is quote unquote the hood. But it's primarily immigrants actually at this point, the actual CBD area. So it's really interesting. South Africa is a very interesting experience. It's very interesting as an American in South Africa. I often, always, more accurately, am, checking my privilege and checking my perceptions of the experience, because, the States is 50 plus years after the civil rights movement, whereas South Africa just came out of apartheid 25 years ago, in my lifetime. So it's quite an experience. It's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know if that answers your question.
It did. Do you experience any racism?
Okay, racism, that one's a little bit hard. No. I mean, I don't see a lot of white people on a regular basis.
No, but I mean like amongst.
So I've experienced some xenophobia. I do experience. Right?
There you go. Is that what I'm looking for?
Yes.
You spoke on the prejudice about the men discounting her as somebody that knows what the hell she's talking about, even though she probably knows more than they do, because they're shallow-minded and not understanding. And then you got the, you speak different type of prejudice.
And that's what I was more so going for, is like, so you're an American.
It's a weird experience because the US is the US and it's a global empire and it controls all of the marketing that everyone in the world experiences. So it's kind of I'm trying to be very
Are you trying to be politically correct?
I am to some extent, but it's almost an audacious favoritism. So people are very fond of me being an American, and I love your accent, and oh my goodness, and blah blah blah. Right. But most people, but when this is a little bit more appropriate to answer your question, is I do experience xenophobia sometimes, and I generally experience xenophobia in very political spaces. So coming into the airport, right? Oh, you've only been somewhere else in Africa. You haven't been back to the United States. Technically, you're not supposed to be here. Blah, blah, blah. Like I experience it in very, very political places, whereas other African immigrants experience xenophobia in their day-to-day lives, right? In their day-to-day interactions with some South Africans, largely around, economic opportunity, right? Like, they come and start businesses, they steal our jobs, those types of experience. I don't experience that, right? Like, because there's this presumption that because I'm an American, that I wouldn't come to South Africa to steal jobs. But there's this okayness with the fact that maybe I am coming to exploit South African labor, right? So it's okay if I'm coming here and I'm only paying my helper 275 Rand, which is $20 to clean my entire apartment, right? Like, that's okay, but it's not okay for this person who might be my helper, who's probably an African immigrant, to come and make only 275 Rand for a day's worth of labor.
Right.
So I don't experience prejudice in quite the same way. Yes, I do. Yes, definitely. I experience a lot of queer phobia because DC is this bubble where being gay, you know, like, and bending gender.
We are out here,
and
right?
You know, yes. And I came out in the city that Marcus
I know
threw a rock at a police officer. You know,
so like it's very
completely
interesting.
different.
Yeah, because it's very interesting. You got several. You know, you got which in my mind is it kind of sucks really, because like you should be able to go anywhere and everywhere. You shouldn't have to like go to a certain place like DC, Atlanta,
Miami,
Miami, or
LA,
like little pockets of places in California and stuff like that. You should be able to go anywhere and be who you are. But unfortunately, we have this stigma all over. I mean, not necessarily all over the world, because there is other countries that just accept it for what it is, you know, and, you know, South Africa in itself probably has an issue because of, unfortunately, religion has caused a lot of this problem.
Yeah.
Because,
the white people came, told them to close their eyes so that they could pray. They said that prayer, opened their eyes, and their land was gone. And now they got Jesus and ain't got no land.
Right.
And all of these very westernized beliefs around, you know, homosexuality is a disease, etc. But South Africa, though, has the most progressive constitutional rights of most any country in the world. So on paper, constitutionally, your rights are human rights out of this world, right? You have the right constitutionally to food, to land. It's almost like a love letter. I had one of the delegates wrote that the Constitution is almost like a love letter to its people, and it is very like, you deserve these things. You should have these things. We imagine a South Africa in which these things are real. But the culture, though, right, is not that simple. It's not that simple as those words. And for a lot of, because Joburg is very similar to DC in the fact that this is a place that a lot of queer people come to avoid ridicule and harassment, etc. Right? Like, it's very artsy. Like I said, it's a migrant city, right? It's where people move to for work. But you still have your cultural beliefs, which might be, whether or not you identify as gay, they might be heteronormative. And me, I'm like, babes, okay, I'm about to wear this skirt today, and tomorrow I'm about to look like a whole man, and you're gonna take all of this, no matter what it is. I call this queer. And that for me is where, you know, that also, but that's how I was exposed to queerness, though. Like, DC is just, people just gender bend. People just like date whoever they want to. And it's a very normative thing. Whereas I don't know that Joburg has quite gotten to that same level of progressiveness, but it's also, you know, again, back to culture, right? So like language. So like pronouns are a huge thing in the States, whereas in South Africa, you don't use pronouns, right? Like in traditional vernaculars, there are no pronouns. There's no she, her, there's no he, him. So then it's a very different experience to transition into this queer, Western queer experience. So it's hard, right? Like, because like what I'm experiencing is microaggressions and it's queer phobia, but it's also just a different cultural experience of these things, right? And it's a different time period of the cultural experience. And so I have to be super conscious that like I have the privilege to be like, oh no, my pronouns aren't this. And that's not necessarily the same experience. And that's not the same thing for people that don't speak English, right? It's different in different languages. So that's a lot to consider. But I guess to the original question, I definitely experience I definitely experienced some different phobias. But I don't see a lot of white people on a regular basis. I see a lot of white people in my building, but I avoid them pretty intentionally. So that's just,
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very
Get it?
different than here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I apply that very flawed language that people tell like women about being safe and not being raped. Well, if you don't go to places with men, then you can't be raped. I applied the same logic to white people. Very flawed. Very, very, very flawed. But if I don't see them, then I can't experience their racism. Like I'm just like,
correct.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I actually said that to somebody the other day because like I said, part of my life was in England, so you knew what neighborhoods not to go into because you have the skinheads, which are kind of like the
white supremacy, right?
So like that's the type of thing that you deal with is like, in certain countries you just know you can't go down that street. So you just avoid it.
I'm from Texas. I know.
So you
I'm from Texas.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I never really experienced all of that. But my first culture shock when it came to experiencing a whole bunch of white people was when I was 14, about to go to, maybe 15, going into 11th grade.
10th, 11th grade.
Right,
yeah.
10th, 11th grade. And I saw all those people running a race. And I was like, first of all, there are people running in a race. And second of all, why are there so many goddamn white people? Oh my Lord Jesus. And my dad was like, so this is a thing. And and this is just life. And I was like, wow, I've never experienced this. And this was just going across the bridge in DC, crossing over the 14th Street or I can't even name the bridge that crosses over Southeast, but crossing that bridge, and I was like, wow.
The Frederick Douglass Bridge, yes.
I was like, what?
Yes, on Mass. Yes, get on Mass Ave, babes.
Yeah. And then from then I was like, wow, okay.
I remember when I moved to Upper Northwest. I mean, well,
this
time when I moved to Upper Northwest, I was like, baby girl,
where did
all of these white people come from? Do they all live here together?
Yep, that's how I felt when I moved to Bethesda with my with Dave.
Your fucking white husband.
Isn't that
my Lord,
right?
Hold on, give me a second. And then there are other people, how you have white people, but then you have foreigners who will come from Eastern Europe and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, there are different pockets of them. Nobody told me any of this. And I think it's just because we're usually sheltered or shielded more so from those experiences because our parents don't want us to experience any type of hatred. Any type of racism or anything, right? They want to keep you shielded from that because they want to keep you happy.
Yeah.
And in those urban centers, you have that option, right? Because, growing up in Texas, what I tell people often is that, I definitely experienced very blatant racism, but what I experienced on a day-to-day basis was being invisible, right? Old white people just walk past me like I didn't exist. You don't see me here. You don't see me standing in this line. You don't, it was just, basically I'm just invisible, right? It was a very visceral, you are nobody type of experience, right? And my mom was super intentional on moving us to Dallas, right? And making sure that we lived in the white side of Dallas, that we lived on the north side of 365, that we went to the schools that had books. And I grew up knowing that living in the Black areas of Dallas meant that you wouldn't have access to the same type of education, that you wouldn't have access to the same type of books, that you wouldn't, I was very consciously aware of that my entire childhood, which goes back to why did you move to DC? Because it was Black people everywhere.
Yes,
I was
everywhere.
like, oh my God, Black people are allowed to just be outside like this.
Yep.
They work at all the stores. No, not all the stores. Yes. And it's Black people at universities, nigga. Oh
and
my God.
They own things. Correct.
They own things.
Yeah.
It's so sad for me to come to DC right now. I remember when I was there, last April. And I was like, this is not U Street. Like, this is not 14th Street.
Right.
14th Street, where the prostitutes used to be in 2006. No, this is not 14th Street.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I remember it as.
It's changed a lot.
Yeah, it's changed a lot.
So, I mean, you know, a lot of things have gone by the wayside. And I think that people think, you know, the changes are good, but in my viewpoint, I think the changes are bad because you don't, you're wiping away tradition and history.
Culture. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just thinking about like Ben's not knowing, you know, after that first round of small business loans, if they would be able to survive. Ben's chili ball. Okay, I'm y'all need to edit this out. Y'all need to edit this out. I personally don't think that Ben's is good. I'm not a fan of Ben's.
You're not the only person.
No, you're not. You're not.
But
so we're not editing it out.
We're not editing that out. You're not the only person who thinks that Ben's chili balls.
I've been to Ben several times, and it's not like the number one place to go to. You know,
I like
but
Ben's.
I'm going to Ben's because it's black owned.
Correct, exactly. You go there because it's black owned. It's traditional. You know you're going to see mama when you go in there. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Like the idea that Ben's would go out of business is
crazy to me.
It's crazy. Or Sankofa, you know, like these places that you know that you're attached to because they're black, right? You're attached to them for the very reason that this reminds you that DC was a black city, right? Like I moved to DC because it was a black city. I wrote my senior thesis on DC and like that transition, which has been in the works. They've been working on it. They didn't just start 5 years ago. They've been working on this plan, but it's crazy to, you know, think that in my tenure in DC, I remember getting off the train in 2013 at the Shaw Howard station and being like turned around because I was like, am I in the right place? What happened in the 3 months that I haven't been on this side of town? This is crazy.
Yeah, it's different now. It's very different.
They're doing their best.
Yeah. Well, Court, you know, I want to ask you one last question, and it's more about, would you ever see yourself coming back to the States?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
Very hard.
No.
Obviously, I have. Obviously, I have like such amazing friends that are family and godchildren and nieces and nephews in the States, and that's really important to me. Community is really, really important to me. But in my like growing communist manifesto, you know, y'all gonna burn it down? Because I will definitely come back for the revolution. I'm there. Like, sign me up. Okay, like, and the class struggle is the struggle, right? Definitely Black, and obviously like class and race typically cut along the same lines, but the class struggle is the struggle. And so as I'm over here writing this communist manifesto, the US gotta fall, like as a whole. Capitalism has to fall, and the US is its number one contender. So
capitalism is bad.
It looks a little unlikely. Yeah.
It causes a lot of problems.
Yeah.
You know?
Around the world. Yeah.
And I wish that people would look at it in that light versus looking at it in a different way. Like, oh, you know, I'm gonna get mine and, you know, take care of mine. You know, you're looking across at another person. Even white people, like they look across at another person that is white and try to dominate that person versus we can
we can work together.
Exactly. Yeah, we can work together and build something great. But
you
know,
the master's tool won't solve the master's problems. Like, and capitalism is not gonna, even Black capitalism is not gonna save us. And I get it, right? Like, I'm not I'm not going to dare tell Black people to not have jobs and not make sure that they have incomes to feed themselves. And I really, I definitely, as someone who grew up a poor kid, that like my mama was like, y'all want to pay the lights or y'all want to get some groceries?
Right.
Like I am definitely like understanding, but I'm also just like really understanding that we don't have to hoard. Like the earth is abundant naturally, right? Like that there is more than enough. And someone is, allowing us and, pushing this idea that there's not enough and that if we don't hoard, then we won't have and our children won't have. And I mean, I really can't, I don't know that I can any longer be invested in the idea of generational wealth when there are like people in my generation that I know on a first name basis that don't have access to food. Like that's,
it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel like I should be that person. Like it, to my core, it just hurts because I think that it's something that has caused a lot of problems, even in Black society, because we try to do this whole let's buy Black, but if you really think about it, like it's not necessarily let's buy Black, it's really building each other up more so by
let's stop paying for these things because we are reinforcing the fact that food should cost this much money because we keep going to the grocery stores because we can afford it and there's a lot of people that can't afford it. And that's not okay.
It's not. That's another. Whew.
I know. That's a whole.
I think we might have to do another show.
Absolutely.
Cousin.
Yeah. Well, Court.
I'm just gonna adopt you.
We definitely family.
Did you say you're adopting Courtney? You're adopting.
She's my cousin now.
Yep.
I always ask, it's so funny. Okay, so one of my favorite things to do is when South Africans ask me what my surname is, I'm like, okay, well, what are Black American surnames? Because there are only 5. So tell me what my surname is. And I promise you 70% of the time, in 5 names, they say Williams. Like, there's it's so standard. So yeah, we definitely cousins. I mean, there's only a few people that could own slaves, so we definitely, Our folks was on the same plantation at some time.
Right.
So tell us basically, at the end of every episode, we like to promote a small business, and I'd love it if you promote it yourself and what you're doing, and tell us a little bit about what Urban Fireworks is.
Yeah, so Urban Fireworks is an international equity strategy firm, and we provide diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. In addition to Urban Fireworks, I also design and host small food experiences because food is what brings us together, but it is an experience that goes beyond food. They are generally social settings for different communities that have been traditionally disadvantaged. You can find urbanfireworks.org very easily. You can find me on social media. I am Most High Court. I'm also the food_court on Instagram. If you are interested in plant-based food, I cook a lot of things that have every color in the rainbow.
Awesome.
I love it.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
We do have to have you back on.
We do. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, so don't get mad.
I won't have a hair appointment.
Do not make a hair appointment. Do not make a hair appointment on that day.
That's right.
That's so that day. Because unfortunately, to our audience, to Black people, we have a thing about being on time, and so
I never make anything on time.
I know.
It's in our bones.
When I hear I hear it as like a thing to get to. Like we make a time and say, oh, we're gonna meet at 9:30, but that's like the starting point. I already know there's like a buffer, maybe.
Yeah, there's a buffer all the time. Like literally, I don't know why we don't do this more often. Like if you make a reservation, you should make a reservation for 10 o'clock and tell everybody to be there at 9:30.
Yep.
No, the South Africans have it. you will get an invitation that says 6:30 for 7, right? So 6:30 for start at 7. 6:30 is what time you should be here,
Right.
because
That's
at 7, it's gonna start.
That's most likely.
Which is fine. I think if you start to set that in people's minds, they know they have a window.
Yep.
To sit there.
Yeah.
You know. So,
No, as the Jamaicans say, soon come.
Right.
Soon come. I'm gonna get there. Am I not? I'm gonna get there.
right.
Soon come.
Yeah.
I like that. I think
like
I
that.
have to adopt that one too.
Yeah.
Well, so thank
Yes.
you, Courtney,
Thank you,
for coming on. We appreciate you. I think we learned a lot, and I hope our audience learned a lot, and
Yes.
and all of that good stuff. And we will definitely would love to have you on again.
Absolutely.
So, with that said,
said,
thanks guys for joining
thanks,
us
guys.
again for another one. And peace.
Until next time.
Peace.
Thanks, y'all.
Yes, thank
The
you.
Real to Real podcast is presented by Herbert Williams Beffo and Bianca Mosquitis. Our producer is Ben Runyon. Our technical director is Nick Patry. Audio and video lead is Megan Kottner. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and like us on Facebook and Instagram at Real to Real, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or anywhere else podcasts are found. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. It's been real with Coach Herb and B.